Okay, good evening,
Good
everyone.
evening, everyone.
Thank you for being here tonight. What we're going to do now is a quick introduction of our panelists for the evening, and then we're going to turn it over to the Minister of Social Development and Seniors, Minister Tanae Farbit. We have at the top of the screen DPP Cindy Clark. Good evening. We have Center Against Abuse, Lori Shield. Good evening. We have Senator Lindsay Simmons here on the panel. Good evening. We have Tina Laws, Women's Resource Center. Good evening. And then we also have at the very bottom of our screen, Susan Adamar. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And I would like to welcome Minister Tanae Farbit to start the discussion.
Thank you, Dana. And I first want to start off by thanking everyone for joining us this evening for this very important topic of domestic violence. Um, our fight for domestic violence must continue, and we have to be committed to never be wary when it comes to domestic violence, because at least one domestic violence murder occurs in Bermuda every year. And so we have to remain vigilant in encouraging healthy relationships amongst our people in our island. Um, we have to also recognize that this pandemic has um, put people in circumstances in which they probably saw no way out. With the restricted movement and social isolation and the economic insecurity caused by the pandemic, it has increased persons' vulnerability to violence in their homes. And as a result, many countries, including Bermuda, have seen an increase in calls to helplines and calls for help. Some countries have noted the escalation has been 5 times more than what was documented prior to this pandemic. I just also wanted to share that Bermuda does have an international treaty which we signed and was extended to us in 2017, and that is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Therefore, we have a duty to monitor domestic violence and work hard towards ending violence in any capacity. I just wanted to share with the listening audience this evening that we have Bermuda laws that provide some protection. Do we need more? Do we need to look at them and maybe provide for more protection? Yes. But the laws that we do have out there now are, and you'll hear more about them this evening as we have this very interesting discussion. But we do have the Domestic Violence Protection Order Act of 1997. We do have the Criminal Code Act 1907, the Criminal Code Sexual Offenses Amendment Act of 1993, the Criminal Code Amendment Act of 2007, child pornography, the Stalking Act of 1997, the Stalking Amendment Act of 1998, and more recently, we have introduced the Revenge Porn Act of 2021. And so those are some laws that we do have for our protection. I want to also take the time to just state that although we have a beautiful panel of women this evening, we will have representation by way of another forum to make sure that we include all genders, that including our males. But what we speak of this evening affects all demographics, not just female, not just males. It includes the young, the seasoned, the Black, and the white. And so I just want to make sure that that information is understood. This government encourages any victim of any violence to seek the support they need through a friend, a family member, a coworker, the police, or a helping agency. I want to take this time to acknowledge February as being Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. We want our teens to know we want our teens to know your worth and to learn about healthy relationships and self-empowerment. every person is deserving of a healthy relationship. And so, without further ado, I want to again welcome our panelists, and we're going to have a hearty discussion this evening as it relates to domestic violence. And so, we look forward to what everyone is going to contribute and share this evening. How is everyone this evening? Good?
Very
Mhm.
well.
Very
Good.
well.
Mhm.
Wonderful. So, we're
Mhm.
first going to start off by acknowledging um, defining domestic violence and what does domestic violence look like in our community or any community. So if Lorraine, you can start off by describing or defining domestic violence and the types of violence, and then we can allow the other panelists to share as well.
Sure. Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much for having this forum, and thank you for the invite. So, basically, violence falls under abuse because we don't want people to think that it's only about the hitting, the slapping, and those types of things. So, it's actually domestic abuse, and violence falls under that. And so, domestic abuse is a pattern of unwanted behaviors that are used by, in this form, we're going to say an intimate partner, whether it's current or a former partner, and those behaviors are used to gain and maintain power and control over another individual. So the behaviors can include physical with the hitting. It can include sexual, making you do things in a sexual nature or have more than one partner. Also includes sexual assault in there as well. It can be verbal or emotional abuse, utilizing a variety of forms of calling you names. It can also include what I would call gaslighting, where you're just constantly arguing with the other individual and saying things that you're just repeating yourself because the person is just constantly lying about everything. There's religious abuse, financial abuse, there are a number of things. And the most recent is, of course, social abuse, where you spoke about revenge porn. And so we find individuals now who are in a predicament where they're being held hostage because they have sent intimate pictures to their partner, and now the partner saying, well, if you leave me, I'm going to send these out to a number of people or everyone in my contact list. So it's a number of things that fall under domestic abuse, and I'm sure that we'll be covering the majority of them tonight, Minister.
Thank you, Lorraine. I just want to elaborate on something that you mentioned, Lorraine, in regards to intimate partner violence. Are there other sorts of types of violence that we would recognize other than an intimate partner?
Sure, of course. When it comes to domestic abuse, you can look at any family pattern, someone that's within the home, particular. So it can be something between a grandson and a grandmother, or a father and a daughter. It can even include outside members that may be in the home. And Cindy can correct me on this if I am in error. But when it comes to the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act for Bermuda, it speaks to those individuals within the home.
So it can actually also include a close personal relationship with another
Mhm.
person. So it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to just be in the home. That's the more common type we see. But it could be somebody in the workplace. If you have a close working relationship with someone in the workplace, it doesn't have to just be in the house.
Tina, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was actually going to say what Cindy said, so she covered that.
Yeah, I
It
think
could
it's
be
very
Yeah.
anywhere.
So it
Yeah.
includes,
important.
the
Go
other
ahead.
one that we see that isn't necessarily in the house is a lot of landlord tenant
Mm.
Mhm. Mhm.
experiences, but you can have employers, employees, or employee as well.
Mhm.
So it's very important that we recognize that domestic violence in any sort of relationship or partner type can be displayed other than an intimate relationship, and I think that's important to mention. So, do you want to elaborate on? We were having a discussion earlier about even mother to child, or did, I think you're on mute, Sue.
My apologies. I think one of the things that is very under-researched, unrecognized, in fact, is the violence in the home towards parents from their teenagers, from their children. It's something that's very under-explored. It is certainly under-researched, and it's very much under-recognized. It's creates a lot of shame about it. Parents don't want to actually acknowledge the fact that their children have committed some sort of abuse against them. I think there's a lot to do with perhaps feeling a sense of failure as a parent too, that your child is behaving that way. I mean, sort of juvenile delinquency has been around for what, 100 years or so. Cindy would probably know that. But this is very much something that's unrecognized. And if you have a parent, particularly the male perpetrator in the house, it gets copied by young teenagers as well. The dynamic gets created of that power and control. And so, unfortunately, it's more pernicious and more extensive than is currently acknowledged.
Thank you, Sue. So let's move on a little bit to Bermuda statistics, or what we've been able to capture. Cindy, we had a discussion at one point where, we recognize that domestic violence happens a lot more often than we actually know about, right?
That's correct.
And that there's possibly at least one domestic violence murder a year in Bermuda. Do you have any statistics that you can add to that?
Well, what I was going to say, Minister, is that you were absolutely spot on. At least in the last 20 years, we've had one domestic violence related murder every year in the last 20 years. And we've had multitudes more of just injury as opposed to, and I mean serious injury as well, as opposed to just death. I don't have a statistic for 2021 that would be useful because of the COVID issues, but our last year prior to that, we were averaging something about 30% of our cases were domestic related. So when you think about the amount of cases that come through this office, that 30%, 1/3 of them are based on domestic violence. That's a pretty high number for such a small jurisdiction. So yeah, that's where we are.
Thank you for sharing that. And Lorraine, if you can share what sort of statistics comes through the Center of Abuse.
Sure. So when it comes to us, we've seen our numbers increase over 100 for the last 4 or 5 years. Also in Bermuda, our statistics show that 1 in 3 women will have domestic abuse situation during their lifetime. So whether they're the victim as a child or even as an adult, they will be a victim during their lifetime. The police, their major call-outs are for domestic. So at least 80 to 85 call-outs a month for the police. And when it comes to the hospital, they have on average about 50 reported cases approximately every year. Of course, that can go up and down with the years. Some years they see 80 cases, some years they may see 30. But on average, with the hospital, they receive about 50 cases reported of domestic abuse a year. Minister, unfortunately, we don't have a central repository that will house all this information where people can send their statistics into. So, it's something definitely that the government should look into having so that we can get proper statistics on this.
Yes, thank you. I agree with that. We are actually looking into that by collaborating with UN Women and doing a very special project as it relates to capturing information as it relates to domestic violence. And I do want to send a shout out to Catherine Cook, actually, who has more recently captured some information and data on domestic violence in Bermuda. I don't believe that information has been released yet, but when it is released, we look forward to having that information as well. What about domestic violence cases that are witnessed by children? Do we have any statistics on that?
Well, I know the last statistics that I received from DCF is that they had a jump from like 100 and something cases with domestic abuse to a year where it had over 250 cases of domestic abuse. So DCFS is definitely seeing an increase in their cases that they have with children that are involved in domestic abuse situations.
So that's a very key piece of information for public to understand. When we talk about trauma and how it can be secondary, particularly to persons who are in the environment, may it be in the household or any other environment in which domestic violence occurs. So let's talk about that. Where can domestic violence occur? Where does it occur?
Anywhere and everywhere.
Exactly.
From in the grocery store. I recently read a file where the mother of a very young child thought that she had put her, I think, 3-year-old son in a car, thinking he wouldn't have seen the assault that was happening upon her, and he was able to see all of it. So it's car parks, grocery stores, in the house, obviously, out at
In the
concerts,
workplace.
in the workplace. I can't think of anywhere I haven't seen an example of it happening. I don't know if Laurie has any thoughts of.
Even in churches, of course, you're going to see it out in the community. You're going to see it at sporting events. You're going to see it at even people's parties at their homes. So there, any place you can think of, domestic abuse has happened. It's
Including
not
the
just
court.
confined to the home.
And it's also including the courtroom.
Yes.
Yes,
I've
definitely.
seen it personally in the courtroom.
Yeah.
We aren't at that point, but I know that I have many a time had to meet with a victim, and the victims aren't always female, but meet with the victim to explain that the victim has come to me to say they don't want to proceed. And Laurie once shared with me in an old training session we had done together that every victim is more afraid of their perpetrator than they are of me or any prosecutor or any courtroom setting. So, as much as we would try to support victims in their decisions, I always tell them that once it comes to a court case, it's no longer in their hands to not proceed. That decision is mine and mine alone. Sometimes that gives them a sense of relief because they're not responsible for the decision. And sometimes I've seen the perpetrator get upset with the victim in my presence, in a courtroom in front of a judge, so there's really no limit to where it can happen.
And let's elaborate on that topic, Cindy and Tina. In my presentation earlier, I spoke about domestic violence has no demographic. It can affect anyone or any part of our demographic. Are you able to elaborate on that?
Tina, I don't know if you want to go first.
Sure. One of the things we have to be mindful of is that, like we mentioned, it can happen anywhere to anyone, starting from 1 year old right along up to 101 years old, right? And so we have to be mindful that most times people look for someone that may look battered. So, if I walk into a room and I look like this, automatically people's going to believe, oh, she's got it all together. She's happy. She's always fun. Not knowing that behind the scenes, I'm probably dealing with someone that's very abusive. Thank God I'm not, but that happens. So, I often say domestic violence victims, even batterers, don't have a face, a specific look, a specific action. You see people, he's so nice or she's so nice. I couldn't imagine. They're excellent on their job. They're kind. They do this, they do that. And the minute you say they have been abusive, other people put this guard up, like true, because many batterers are really, really nice. Many batterers are loved by many. Many batterers are in high positions. Many batterers are making decisions for our lives and our children's lives. Many batterers could be in a courtroom, defending or not. Many batterers could be a teacher, could be a pastor, could be a doctor, could be anyone. So, we have to be mindful that we're not sitting there looking at someone's face or appearance and believing that domestic violence or batterer has a specific look, because that's how so many batterers have been getting over for so many years. It's because they're well liked and they're helpful in the community and they're kind, but that's very untrue. So people have to know that if someone comes and says, I am a victim of whatever it is, whether it be a child or a senior or an adult, you cannot look at that person's face. You have to believe them first, and you have to hear what their story or their circumstances are and treat it accordingly. Must I go further?
You can go further and start talking about warning signs.
Oh my goodness, there are so many warning signs,
Yes.
but I guess I know Lori wants to talk about warning signs. You want to talk about warning signs? But one of the things I would mention before Lori gets started on her warning signs, because I know she has a list of them, is that we have to be mindful that um, warning signs can look like, let's talk about being on your job. Warning signs can look like someone calling in sick very often, right? And he or she isn't calling in sick because she doesn't like her job. It might just be healing from a major bruise. It may be healing from a black eye. It might be that her partner has held us hostage overnight, or she or he has held the partner hostage where they can't leave their home. And so we have to be very careful how we treat people on our jobs. There are so many warning signs that we have to look out for. There are some warning signs that you have to think about as professionals in our community, as employers. What can it look like on your job? It can look like the phone constantly ringing for your employee. That's a form of abuse. It can look like her or he not attending events when they're supposed to because they have to go right home so that they don't get in trouble. It can look like not raising their hand to participate in outside events or extra events. They keep saying no. It could be because if they do not get home by 5:30, 1 p.m., they are going to get in trouble. So, we have to be very mindful as to what warning signs can look like. I just talked about a few of them as an employer, but I know Louise is going to fill us up with the remainder of what she has. And I can piggyback on that.
Thank you, Tina. So, Minister, when it comes to warning signs, we always think, like I said earlier, we always think that, an individual must be hit in order for it to be a warning sign, but that's definitely not it. A warning sign very early on is quick involvement, how the person wants to just fill up every bit of your space and time, how they want to be around you 24/7, how everything that they say is just perfect. That can actually be a warning sign. A warning sign is where all of a sudden, like Tina said, they're calling you often. And there's nothing wrong with someone calling you often. But if you miss that telephone call, all of a sudden it's an argument, it's a fight. And now you're scared to miss your telephone call. And so you're now being trained to call them if you leave your desk, if you go somewhere. Warning sign is just being constantly accused of being in affairs. These are things that we hear daily. That's one of the major warning signs that, that my partner's always accusing me of having an affair with someone else. Although they see me 24/7, they know where I am because I'm always calling them and telling them where I am. I don't go anywhere because if I go somewhere, they're going to be upset. All of these are warning signs. Another thing that we hear often is that they want to always see your phone. They want to see who you've been talking to. They break your phone often to stop you from talking to other people. And that is just even your friends. They don't want you to have relationships with your friends. They'll start talking bad about your friends, saying that your friends are trying to get in a relationship with them. And so it's all a part of isolating you. So when you see yourself being isolated from friends and family, that is a warning sign. Tina talked earlier about work issues. Some people will keep you up late at night talking to you for hours purposely so that when you go to work, you'll be tired. Or if they have to take you to work, they'll wait until it's normally time for them to take you to work. And they'll say, oh, no, I'm not going to take you now. So they interfere with your work, which is interfering with your finances because now you have issues on the job and you may not be able to perform as you normally would perform. Um, Another warning sign where you know that you are in an abusive situation, especially when it comes to emotional and verbal abuse, is that you always find yourself focusing on that part. Now you're trying to figure out how you're going to be able to make them happy because you know that they are in a state whereby you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. So you're just trying to think, okay, if I do A, this will upset me. So let me do B, this, that, and the other. And so that's another sign that you are in an abusive relationship. Of course, if you can't voice your opinion, if you're scared of the individual, that's a warning sign. If you've heard that they've had previous abusive relationships, that is a warning sign. So there are a variety of warning signs that individuals at times dismiss, because, as Tina said earlier, these are the individuals who are great in the community. They're very charismatic. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. And when they feel you pulling away, when they feel you saying, oh, this isn't working for me, I'm going to leave, guess what's going to happen? They're going to put on that charisma on you. And so that's what draws you back in every time. And so we just have to be mindful that, when that person turns on that charm and you're about to leave, that's actually a warning sign.
Another one I want to add to that is you may have a partner that wants to be amongst your friends and family and be considered well liked. You will find yourself at events or going to your family's home just to attend for dinner or just to go and cook a meal for your mom or just go to clean or cut grass, and you'll find this person continuously showing up at every place that they can find you and befriending your friends. And where it gets to a place of wherever you are, they are, and back to getting people to like them that much so that they can keep, because really what it's all about is keeping an eye on you, right? And so if you find that you can't have any space, every time you're ready to move or do something, they want to inconvenience you or find themselves in the midst of your friends and family, that's a warning sign. There are so many warning signs. There's a warning sign if, for instance, every time you may be close to your family, and every chance that they get, they want to find an issue or create some form of problem between you, your family, friends, or the other, so that they can cause a wedge. And remember, it's all about power and control. So every chance they get, they want to cause a wedge between anyone that it appears that you may be close with, someone that is influential in your life, because they know that if they can get next to that person or cause a problem or a wedge between them, they've got you right where they want you. So we have to be very careful of that.
Senator Lindsay, I see you smiling there. Did you want to add anything to warning signs? I mean, a lot of times you hear people say and I don't like to say, or you hear people say, because it could be feeding into the narrative of even stigmas that we have out there. But didn't they know that that person behaved that way in a previous relationship? And so if you can speak to that, warning signs, is that a warning sign? Do people not deserve second chances? Can you elaborate on that?
I could speak from my own experience. For me, I didn't see the warning signs at first, or I didn't want to see the warning signs. But they were there. Once you go back and look and reevaluate your situation, you realize that, hey, when he stopped saying, you know what, I don't think you should hang with your friends anymore. They're still partying, you're growing up, stay home. And then I was like, oh, that's nice. He wants me to stay home. But really, it was about control. So for him to control the situation. And I think that people miss the warning signs. It's the little things that you don't pick up on. It's the subtle changes that they try to make on you to get you where they want you to be. So I think we do tend to miss the warning signs. And I think we need to kind of listen to our friends and families a little bit more, because they are the ones that usually see the warning signs before you when you're in that situation. You start changing who you are, and then being more complacent and doing what they want you to do. So I think that where I thought it was sweet, oh, he just wants me to stay him. It was really about control. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, but he wanted me to stay him. So I think that we just have to pick up on the warning signs a little bit faster and reevaluate, hey, why are things changing like this? Why can't I go with my friends? Or why is it a question of me going with my friends? Or why does he want to know what I'm doing all day, every day, but I can't question him on what he's doing? So I think it's the little things that we have to pick up on.
Thank you, Senator Lindsay. I think it's interesting that you share. In one hand, we're saying, they want to know sorry, they want to know where we are, or they want to know where we're going, or or stay home with me, and we interpret that, or we can interpret that as, oh, they want to spend time with me, how we interpret things. But that's all part of the process as well. I'm thinking, in learning what those behaviors look like over and over again. And actually, Sue, let's talk about those behaviors, right? We've heard from Lorraine and Tina about control and power and trust and interference.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting listening to all of the very obvious signs and situations, but they're far more pernicious and subtle than we give credit to. I think Lindsay's absolutely right. That they happen very slowly, so you may not even see them happening. Once the control is established, then the need for control diminishes considerably. It can be extremely subtle. It's just a look. I mean, I'm sure Cindy will attest to this. I've been in the courtroom where somebody is getting hysterical, and maybe the judge says, "What is wrong with your client? Can you get them to behave themselves?" And the judge might say, "Well, he just looked at me." There doesn't need to be any overt sort of warning signs once a control is established. Also, there's only about 2%, according to the UK figures, some time ago, I admit, but I'm sure it's increased, that 2% of cases that actually get reported, and they're the more serious ones that Laurie or Cindy will see. They're far, far more pernicious, quiet, subtle effects that have over time the ability to erode one's self-esteem and destroy a woman's construct. We are relationally based. All of our processing is relationally based. And so anything that goes wrong in relationships affects us profoundly. So any changes that you might see that you didn't see before, they can be extremely subtle. And this is what makes it so difficult, is because we don't identify them so easily. We identify the more serious ones much more easily. But those ones that are subtle and have effects over time, not so easy to spot. And that's why I think it gets to a stage where over time, the more the control is needed, there's a very distinct correlation between the level of abuse and the level of control that they perceive they need. And so, it isn't always obvious for quite some time.
Thanks for sharing that, Sue, because, we're going to go into impact now, but when, we see physical impact, so we'll see a bruised eye, or we'll see a scratch, a burn, broken bones, stab wounds. But then there are other sorts of impacts, emotional and psychological, maybe low self-esteem, low confidence, self-blaming, isolation, depression, even suicidal tendencies, and actually attempting suicide as well. And feeling loss of oneself, loss of productivity. Let's talk about more of those impacts as it relates to domestic violence.
I think one of the things that is very essential to do is to reconceptualize the abuse as trauma. It's been quite notable now for, I first noticed it in the early 90s, where there were very distinct parallels in the presentations between people who were experiencing domestic violence and those who were abuse survivors or trauma survivors generally. But there's something different about a more complex trauma. In other words, there's traumas that occur multiple times over years. Once you introduce that variable time into a situation, the effects are much more profound. They're less easy to spot. I think with women, the disturbances of self-organization, or DSO, is probably the most disturbing and distressing because it isn't a change in personality, but it's in the change in the way that we operate on an interrelationship basis. And so it often gets missed, and it presents as many other things in multiple health settings. For instance, you might see somebody going from one healthcare provider to another, and there's nothing specifically there. And a gynecologist once said to me, "What do you do if you suspect domestic abuse going on or domestic violence?" And I said, "Well, you have to ask." And they said, "Well, wouldn't that upset the person if I asked them if they're being abused?" And I said, "Well, you have to take that risk. You literally have to take that risk. There's ways of asking it, obviously. I think we all must really learn to be much more aware of when you see somebody who's disorganized or chaotic, or there's, as Tina said, maybe just missing work or whatever. We don't know what's going on. We're very quick to judge and to make attributions. And most cases with domestic violence, it's misattributions. I've seen a lot of these situations where somebody's classed in as a personality disorder because they've just become so chaotic. This makes it very, very difficult for access to services. They need a lot of patience, a lot of advocacy. They don't trust. Their sense of trust is completely destroyed. And so to assume that they trust us or they trust the services, it's just naive. They don't. They need a lot more facilitation and advocacy than we believe is necessary. If they come and they report with something else, it's always wise to look at what's underneath. Anxiety, depression. When you get used to working in trauma, you realize that it isn't really depression. It looks like it, but it's not quite depression as such. It's usually abuse or continued repetitive abuse or complex trauma. So there's a lot of misattribution that goes on. I think more education on all of the subtleties and the impact, the short and long-term impact on their family, their friends, their whole context needs to be much more talked about. Really, it's so wide-ranging. You could talk about it for an hour, really.
Yes.
Yeah, and
it's highlighting really the need to pay attention to the more subtle things.
I want to piggyback on what Sue stated, talking about addressing domestic abuse. So just like how we screen for high blood pressure, they're going to ask you questions. You can actually screen for domestic abuse. You can ask someone, have you been afraid of someone in the last year? Have you been threatened by someone in the last year? So there are a number of questions that you can ask a person, whether you be a doctor or someone in a position such as Cindy, who the person's coming in for one thing, but you're seeing some other signs going on. So you can actually screen for domestic abuse. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that when we think of domestic abuse, we always have this mindset that the person must be poor, that the person must be lowly. There are many individuals who are CEOs of companies, whether you be male or female, who have been victims of domestic abuse. So they're running a company by day, and so they have it all together, but at home, there's a different story that's going on. And so you have that dynamic that is working as well. And there was one more thing that my brain has, apparently it's just disappeared. So hopefully it will come back.
Come back.
So let me piggyback on that. Ben, we also have to be careful as well. I mentioned earlier what it can look like on your job, right? It can also look like a person that's very angry. Okay, it can look like someone very difficult. It can look like an employee or an individual who, you just can't get nothing through left, right, or center. And you have to think about it. Sometimes, like Laurie said earlier, there are many people who are receiving probably hour sleep nights because their partner is up interrogating them all night. So if you can only imagine what it's like when we don't get any sleep, well, we have a project or we're doing something and we only got an hour sleep the next day, it's like, what? What? I'm tired. That's not what we say to people, but you got to remember, there are many people who still have to operate, have to go to work, no matter if you're a starting in an entry-level job or a CEO. these are still people having to deal with stuff like that. And then you got to think about, there are many women who, and I know from coming into the Women's Resource Center, there are many women who are being accused right now of not being proper or decent parents, where their children are very aggressive or taking over their household. Well, a lot of times these children are seeing their parents, their father or stepfather or their mother's friend, whoever it is, be very abusive, and the mimicking these same behaviors. And her mommy is covering up because, like you said before, they're afraid to say, my so and so is abusing me. So, but rather what they will do is have their child have to be suspended from school and go through all of these things to keep face, so that they don't have to go home and say, you told that teacher what, that so children are taking a lot of the fall for these battlers as well. So there are a lot, and when I say women, I work at the Women's Resource Center, I make sure women are well, but this goes for men and women. But these are things that we have to, it's like Sue said, there's so many it's vast. Domestic violence is vast. But we have to now start thinking about the little things, not just bruises or black eyes, but we have to start looking at things that you can see, right? There's underlying issues that you can't see. For instance, we have women that come into these doors and they may come in talking about, I need a warning letter, just hypothetically speaking. I need a warning letter, or I need a grocery voucher, or I need a class on how to manage my finances. By the time you finish talking to them, and of course, because I'm a trained facilitator, domestic violence facilitator, I could pick it out one time, right? As well as the survivor. I can see right away, and my response is, I understand. So not all the time you're going to come right out and say, are you being abused? Because most times I would have said no at the time. So they're going to say no, but when I find that I say, I understand, and I've been there, a lot of times you find women just break down crying because they just want somebody to understand, not judge them, but understand. Not saying that it's right, but understand. We understand. Now, what can we do to help you? Not everybody's willing to leave right away, but we understand. So we have to find a way for those that are ready to leave, yes, by all means. What are we going to do to help you to get you out of that situation ASAP when you're ready? Great. But for those that aren't ready to leave, for those that may stay together, and I've seen it, that are still together for years and years and years after support, we have to make sure that we're supporting them along the way, giving them the tools that they need to get through another day, not week or month, just to get through another day. So, if there's anything I can share with the listening audience, for any and everybody, your neighbor, your daughter, your employer, a stranger, you see, the most important thing is that they just need to know that you believe them, you understand, and if it's all they want is your ear for that time, that's what they're looking for. Not all the time they want to hear, why are you still there? Because, Minister, you mentioned earlier, people often say, well, you heard her say about her ex. Why would you do it? I mean, I'm a survivor. And, I'm sure we're all survivors of something, right? And quite frankly, when you meet somebody, they're not going to tell you, oh, my ex was super amazing and they walked away from me because I was nothing. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to tell you everything negative about that partner so you can start disliking that partner. You don't know them, but you're going to dislike them. And then that's part of them building your confidence. So you can feel like, I'm the one. They love me. I'm special, right? And so, we have to be mindful that we are meeting people where they're at. And sometimes all it is having an ear to listen, not direct, not to judge, not to tell what they should and shouldn't do, but just to listen. And after a while,
compassionate care model.
Exactly. And after a while, they'll become comfortable enough, if they do, to say, listen, what is my next step?
So let's talk about next steps.
Minister, sorry.
Go ahead, Senator Lindsay.
Sorry, I also like to say, I think we need to start younger. I think we need to go to these schools and educate our children of what domestic violence is. I remember speaking to students at Spice Valley at the time, and one of the things that they said was, how can you be in a relationship and somebody rape you? How can you be in a relationship and somebody abuses you? And all these things. So I think if we take time and find people that could actually get into our schools and let children know what domestic violence is, not just even with parents abusing parents and letting them know this is not right. We need to start earlier, because I think by the time we get into high, by that time, some children have already been abused by classmates, by the family, by the friends. So I think we need to take a conscious effort and go and speak to these students and let them know what domestic violence is. Because I remember in my 4th year at Berkeley, I remember these statistics back then was 1 in every 4 women. And I remember saying to myself, my mama has 4 girls. If anybody's going to be abused, I would rather be me. And because I said, out of all my sisters, I'm probably the strongest. And then to live it through, I was like, well, I didn't really want this to happen to me. So I think that if we start younger and show what could be for domestic violence, we might be able to, save a life or educate, know what the signs are for domestic violence. Because by the time you get to early adult and you feel like this guy is the love of your life or this girl is the love of your life, you don't know that there are subtle warning signs out there. So I think that we need to take the time to educate people what the warning signs are. And I also want to say that as a survivor of being abused, not only physically abused, but mentally abused, the impact, I can't remember what it feels like to be stabbed. I really can't. But I could tell you what it felt like to be abused and mentally. The emotional abuse, I think you carry you forever. The physical abuse, you remember that it hurt, but the impact that it has on somebody is something you never forget and something you live with for the rest of your life. So I think that we have to take that into consideration as well, because sometimes I smell a smell of what he smelled like, and it triggers a memory. And it's just simple things. It might only be for a second, but you're like, he used to smell like that, and you remember these things. So the emotional abuse, I think, is than physical abuse, in my opinion, because I remember how I felt when it happened.
Well,
Can I add to that? Oh, sorry. I'd like to just add to what Lindsay said here, because it's so relevant. The critical issue here to remember that it's not a situation that affects one person; it affects all of us. It's not going away. All right. When you look at it as trauma never goes away. So to think for a moment that anything that is chronic or over time there is a cure or a fix to it is a big mistake. We have to learn how to advocate and facilitate existing with abuse in our community or tolerating it at some level. Otherwise, they won't access the services that are already there. There are a lot of services here that are very good and very well organized, but it's the hesitancy to access them that is a major factor, not being able to help.
I think that I agree with Susan and Lindsay that we have to do the re-education factor, because I mean, if you think about it, even as when we would have all been small girls, if there was a boy who poked you with a pencil, the adult told you it's because he likes you. Yeah. And things as simple as that women are now predestined to believe that type of attention means that the person actually cares for you, as opposed to seeing it as a start of an abusive relationship.
Yeah. You see, what Cindy's saying is right, because what it is, to act what you're saying, Lindsay, too, about the school situation, what we want to do is to give our kids, especially our girls, healthy expectations of what relationships need to be like. How do we create their expectations? What sort of ideas and sort of criteria do we give them to allow somebody to be in a relationship with them, remembering that it's a privilege to be in a relationship. One of the most difficult things and biggest impact, I think, because we are so relationally based as women, is this issue of betrayal. It's a huge insult to us. In fact, it's the most damaging part of interpersonal or intimate relationship violence or abuse. It changes somebody's belief system. You just don't know what you believe in anymore. And when you get that kind of impact, which is very deep, it takes a long time not just to recover emotionally, but to recover physically. Changes in the brain occur with this type of long-term abuse. This is not something that people just miraculously get over, or that visiting somebody for a chat or a talk, or just getting a DVO. Those are all parts of what we can do to help and facilitate their recovery. And each part of that is very important. But it's got to be the overall picture. It's getting everybody to work together with one common view in mind, and that is rehabilitation. Most of the programs that are in place are for men, not women rehabilitation. It's all the investment financially. Unfortunately, most of it to date has been in investing how to take care of men and get them to stop doing it. The same with getting this program off the problem off the streets. We're not dealing with it. Why don't we remove the person that's doing it rather than taking the child in a family, away from school, away from pets, away from their home, everything that they know, and yet the person has only got a DVO and is allowed to do what he wants, except getting close to somebody. That's only one part of it. There's a far bigger picture here that I think tends to get missed, and it's much more sort of a collaborative agency between everybody that works in these areas to make sure that we're all part of a bigger process in rehabilitation, and it needs rehabilitation.
Well, thank you, Sue, because I think it's important to get our listening audience to understand that trauma, what trauma is, and a lot of times, we say it's unaddressed trauma, or they didn't have their trauma addressed, and the understanding of the trauma needs to be ongoing. Sorry, the addressing of trauma needs to be ongoing. Is a very important message here. I would like to just move on to domestic violence orders and also criminal proceedings, in which Lori and Cindy will speak to. If you can just talk about the process. And I want to clear up, we have to clear up this thought that was out there in regards to there being a cost to get a domestic violence order. Now, there can be a cost. So we could speak to that when we're talking about the process of obtaining a domestic violence order.
Sure. So the domestic violence orders is for individuals who we spoke about earlier, because you can get a protection order through the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act or through the Stalking Act. When it goes through the Stalking Act, it's usually someone that you don't know, someone that is not affiliated with you. So that could be like your boyfriend's new girlfriend, ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend who's interfering with you. You can get a protection order through the Stalking Act. But when it comes to Domestic Violence Act, it's that intimate partner, someone that's in your house, someone that's related to you, the landlord, those types of things, you'll get a domestic violence protection order from. And you can obtain a DVPO, is what we call them. You can obtain it from a lawyer. You can obtain it from us, or you can obtain it from legal aid if you are unable to afford it. What it requires of you is that you actually have to provide your story. The magistrate needs to hear your story and understand what has been going on. So from the time you met him, if you've been with him from 10 years or more, of course, you're going to condense it, but there needs to be specifics on behaviors that have occurred so that the magistrate can actually see that there is a pattern of behavior. Now, it's important to note that a DVPO can be obtained with just one bad behavior. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a pattern. It can be one bad behavior. And it is a court matter, so the individual does go to court. It is a closed court matter. So that means it's a private matter where it's only the victim initially in the court with the magistrate and or the advocate or lawyer. And then there's a second part to it where they return. And then the other party, what is called the respondent, the person that is the intimate partner or the family member, then attends to, and then they get to state their side of the story. And then the magistrate will make a decision how it will move forward. The respondent can come in and state, I agree to stay away from that person. or the respondent can come in and state, I don't agree, and then it can go to a trial, and then the magistrate will make a decision. The length of time, the maximum length of time of a DVPO is 1 year. So if matters occur after that year is over, then unfortunately the process has to start again.
Okay. And what I will say is that, as Lori mentioned, it is a private hearing. So people in my department are not involved in it at that stage. It's not publicized in any way. It's not released to the press or anything like that. So if someone is concerned about, their privacy being put out, that isn't the circumstance where it's going to happen. Now, if the respondent breaches that order, that's when my office gets involved. That's a criminal offense. And that will come to the regular magistrate's court. It may even be the same magistrate who heard your private DVPO matter, but when he breaches it, becomes an offense, and so therefore it is in fact public. That can go very quickly, or it might move a little slower depending on what the respondent says. If the respondent accepts that they breached it, we can deal with it within 24 hours of the person, being arrested. If they dispute it, it could take some more time, especially now with COVID, things are moving a little slower because we can't have as many court cases going at the same time for obvious reasons. But that's specifically in respect of domestic violence protection orders. As we said in the beginning, domestic violence takes many, many forms. And, whilst we have that offense, there are also a litany of other offenses. You could have stalking, you could have just common assault, or, something as simple as I've noticed recently, domestic violence showing up in traffic offenses because you give money because you think the person's going to go pay your car license and they don't, you get stopped, you get harassed by that. Any sort of harassment can also amount to domestic violence, but the more serious the offense, the more likely it is that it's going to be tried in Supreme Court. And that's with a jury. So it really depends on what exactly we're saying happened, but the decision to prosecute is one of the most serious decisions a prosecutor can possibly make. And we take certain things into account. But the other thing I want to make sure the listening audience appreciates and understands is that a lot of these offenses don't have a time limit. Breaching the DVPO has a time limit because that's meant to be something that we can do immediately to protect the person, right? So you get the order to protect you from an immediate threat of violence, and the breach is to protect you from the immediate threat of violence. But as I mentioned, there could be other offenses which don't necessarily have a time limit attached, a statutory time limit, and that I think, or Lori or Tina can help. I think that helps victims get to a place where they're comfortable being able to proceed in that respect because they don't feel hampered by a time limit.
Thank you, Cindy. I do want you to touch on something because you mentioned proceedings happening in Supreme Court. Are there incidences where it happens just amongst the family panel or family court, or when it has to do with children, or the involvement?
Right. I was going to say when it's family court with the panel, which has the members of the public involved, that is when a child is involved. There are civil proceedings where recently in the press have been litigation guardians and things like that. Those are civil proceedings where my office is not involved, but that talks about what the child may have been exposed to, and they're dealing primarily with the safety of a child. The other thing that Susan touched on briefly is if I have a juvenile offender who is the one who is committing the violence, that would be dealt with by a magistrate and the juvenile court panel.
And then just another question in regards to, does the law recognize all forms of abuse?
Yes. Domestic violence, much like how Lori and Tina were defining, is very, very broad. It includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. Psychological abuse includes harassment. Abuse could be anything. It really depends on what the actual act or even an omission. So let's say, we were talking about someone who keeps you locked in a house. If you're dependent on that person for groceries, right, and they don't buy your groceries, that could amount to an abuse as well. So people shouldn't feel afraid to make a report just because they don't think it fits within the 4 square boxes of being hit.
And I've had a number of clients that have obtained domestic violence protection orders, and none of it has been physical.
Yeah, and then we have to think about there's also instances where there are many partners who take your women's birth control. There are so many forms of abuse. There are many partners who take their partners' bank cards and supposed to go and buy groceries or pay a bill or get gas and depleting their funds. You know, there are so many things that happen as it relates to domestic violence. I wanted to mention, as it relates to DVP orders, there are so many that want to take out an order, right? So I'm gonna be a victim right now and talk on behalf of a victim. There are so many that want to take out an order, but they feel as though they're being re-traumatized in the court of law, right? And that's their exact words. They feel as though, you know, why do I have to face him? And like we mentioned, it's just as much as a look across the way, and you know it's going to make your life, you know what, after that, right? And so there are so many instances where women feel as though, why can't I just tell my story once? No, I have to tell my story to you, then I have to go tell my story to the magistrate, then I have to go tell my story to DPP, then I have to go. That's very difficult for a lot of people to have to keep rehashing. I'm a survivor of 20 something years, and I cannot clearly tell my story, and I'm extremely happily married, but I cannot tell my story from beginning to end without feeling very uncomfortable, without having probably a sleepless night, without getting lumps and knots in my throat. And so I'm saying all of that to say, we have to remember, for those who are currently dealing with battlers in their lives, you know, to have to tell your story over and over. And I know this is what has to happen because we have to go through the process, right? But to have to tell your story over and over and over. And then the other thing is that after something like this, we should be sure to assign them to a therapist, psychologist, whomever is, because they're going to need that support. That's a lot for them to deal with in one give and take of telling your whole story. Right. And so we have to be cognizant as to when we are getting people to walk away. Yes, whoo, that's amazing. They're doing a DVP order, but it's also a lot of stresses that are attached to that. You know, having to go court and look at your batterer, even if they're quiet, sometimes the silence is, that's just, they've always been silent, but you know what's coming behind that. And then they walk out of there and they don't have the psychological support that they need. So they walk away and they aren't sleeping, they aren't eating. They feel like they're just they're losing their mind because they've had to go through the court proceedings. And so there are a lot of women that opt out of court because they don't feel supported by the court system. So I just wanted
that's
Can
interesting.
I just
Very interesting, Tina. Because before you go, there's Sue, because when we talk about, there are challenges that we will have that will prevent someone from following through. And you mentioned that one, Tina, in regards to disclosing safely. Even being in Bermuda, you know, such a small jurisdiction country, you can run into your perpetrator, you can run into their family. You know, so we're faced with some very interesting challenges. Sue, I'll let you go ahead and make your point in regards to what Tina was discussing.
Yes, one of the things that's really critical here is to recognize the impact from a sense of whether it's litigation or otherwise. The only thing that resurrects trauma or maintains it is a perpetuated sense of vulnerability. You know, we look for different things that will make us, like we call them triggers, about making us vulnerable or anxious or upset. But the one that gets missed, even by professionals, is the fact that it is a felt sense of vulnerability. And most perpetrators of any kind of control or violence are doing that and making somebody intentionally vulnerable. It's an intentional act of making somebody vulnerable. So what can we do instead of just thinking about all of the different situations and things is to keep the core issue here of vulnerability. We are vulnerable anyway in a patriarchal society as women, full stop. You know, there's a whole sense of development that we have in a society that is patriarchal. We have a duty of responsibility to make our sons very aware of how women are vulnerable, particularly at times when they have children. And, you know, any creature on God's earth is vulnerable when they have children. You know, we have to make sure that there are times where people understand that it's not the person that is the problem. It's their inability to cope with vulnerability over time. They just don't have infinite resources. And we have to step up and sometimes fill the gap or provide those resources when those, have become completely worn out. And they do over time with anyone, as we all know that. We can't cope with everything all the time and infinitely. So I think just coming back to that core issue of being very mindful of whatever we do to help in any way, whether it's litigation or otherwise, is to protect that person's vulnerability.
Yeah. And I want to also, having gone through the court proceedings myself in Bermuda, I remember Karen Mahoney and Unavan Corson that dealt with my case
Mhm.
when I first went for my first trial before I dropped the charges. They warned me, the defense are going to call you a liar. They're going to say this didn't happen this way. You're angry about something. So the DPP did a great job preparing me. But at the same time, when it's actually thrown at you, you're like, boo. I remember, I'm not even remember, Shade Sabir was the defense in my case. I didn't like her for years afterwards because I took it personal. I felt that she was attacking me, and I had to understand that she was doing a job, and her job was to try to get him off. And my job was to, I had to say, Lindsay, tell your story, earn your truth. And even after I told my story this time around, and I had people on Facebook saying things like, why did she just tell her story? It's not the first time I'm telling. I've told my story many times. I told it as soon as it happened in the paper. I said it. I've been to different organizations and told my stories. I've been to Berkeley, different schools to tell my story. But you always have people that are still. You have to even know it's just lying.
That's abuse.
That didn't happen that way. You have to in truth and tell your story and be strong enough to it's a lot to tell your story. So when Tina was saying about her and how she feels the lumps, I don't experience that. So everybody has an experience. I know I did cry when I told my story the other day, but I think that was more because I felt for the victim who didn't survive. I just think that we need to lift up each other. I think that we need more women and on. The amount of men that came to me after I told my story this time was amazing. Like, girl, tell your truth. You're strong, Senator. People just stopping to my job to speak to me about it. It was like a breath of fresh air. And then you still had your people that had their negative comments. Oh, that didn't happen. She's a liar. She's this, she's that. So you just have to continue to be strong and tell your story. Not everybody's willing to openly tell the story, but if you are one of those people like me that might hear was telling my story, to be able to say, listen, this happened to me. It could happen to any. I came from a family. I've never seen my mom and daddy argue. Never seen them. So to be in a relationship like this wasn't something that for me or something that I experienced in life. So for me, I didn't know how to see the warning sign because it's nothing that I've seen before. It's nothing I was used to. So that's why I said educating us at a younger age would definitely help to save more.
Yeah.
Lindsay,
I've never seen people cursing each other in a family environment. So to me, I was like, whoa, this is something different. And I didn't know how to handle it. So I think that if we start at a younger age, we'll be able to stop more of these violence situations if we give everybody the tools to look up.
Yeah, I definitely want to say when it comes to the clients that we have, when we do TVPOs, it's empowering for our clients because that's their first step to taking back their power. That's the first step that they've done to stand up for themselves. And so I can have a client that gets a DVPO, and don't get me wrong, it's a very scary situation for them. And when I see them months later, I don't recognize them because the weight's been lifted off their shoulders. They now have taken their power back. They now feel much freer. And so it is an empowering situation for you to go and obtain your DVPO. And you have to, and most people do it in fear. They do it through fear. in order to get that power back, to take that power back from their abuser. And to talk about what Senator Lindsay was talking about earlier, having it in schools and having this conversation. So Center Against Abuse has been having this conversation over the years. And now we have the assistance of Tammy Richardson Augustus, who has brought the One Love program to Bermuda, and she is utilizing the Coalition for Protection of Children to actually assist with having a structured program in a variety of schools, whether it be primary, middle, or high school. So that is coming through the pipeline. So look out for it, Senator Lindsay. You will see it.
Thank you, Lori. And let's talk about the resources that are out there. You did mention that in regards to the program that Tammy Robinson is doing. What
Tammy
other
Richardson
resources?
Augustus.
Sorry, yes, Tammy Richardson Augustus. But there are other resources that we have in our community as well.
Sure, yes, definitely. With the police, we have the Domestic Violence Liaison Officer in PC Patrice Medeiros. She has been on the post for, gosh, I think 2 years now, and
Yes.
she's been doing a phenomenal job in that post. She's one of the first DVLers that actually, they've made her full-time in this position. Prior to that, the police officer always had something else on tap and would get taken away from the domestic violence side of it. And so Patrice has come on board. This is her focus, and she has been phenomenal with clients, whether it's male or female. We've had the opportunity to work with her and other organizations just together, whether it be DCFS, the Department of Child and Family Services, WRC, and or the Family Center even. We've had the opportunity to work with them to assist clients. And sometimes it means that we have to get the approval of the client to sit around the table so that everybody can understand what exactly is going on with the client and how we will be able to assist that individual. But even in resources, I remember what I wanted to say earlier, and I wanted to talk about generational trauma, Minister, because a lot of times what we have, Lindsay said, hey, this didn't happen in my family. But there are a majority of, I would say 80% of our clients are in abusive relationships, and there are generational traumas where their parents were in abusive relationships. And so this is also something that we have to be mindful of, that this is also handed down. It just doesn't just happen out of the blue for some people, for most people, such as Senator, but a lot of times it's generational. It's taught to us. It's normal. So we can say that somebody may be in an abusive relationship. Their self-esteem may be good. This is just normal because they feel like, oh, well, I just fight the person back. So you have that as well. So it's not just about someone who's not fighting back. Many people fight back. Many people get it as good as they receive, but that doesn't negate the fact that they are still in an abusive situation.
And let me just quickly throw this in there really fastly. We talk about going into the schools and talking to the young ones. We talk about, just educating them so that they can know at a younger age. We also have to educate the elders, the teachers, the counselors, the employers, because most times, we can go in these schools and talk to these young children. There are a lot of adults that are inflicting the same behaviors on them. So I think as a Bermuda, as a community, we need to just start educating and equipping adults, employers, teachers, everyone, so that they can know too. Because sometimes you hear a lot of people saying, even teens, they will say, Ms. Laws, I'm going to do this at home. Then I have to come to school and my teacher does the exact same thing to me, or an employer does the exact same thing to me. So, we can't just say we're going to go in and deal with the children at a young age. Yes, that's something we have to continue doing because we're doing that as well. But we also have to make sure that when we walk away, there's teachers understand what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it and how their behaviors and whoever, I'm not just saying for schools, anyone, how that can impact somebody's life, how they treat them. Can impact their lives.
I think the important thing to note is that women heal in good relationships. Women get better by learning how to befriend themselves. Us passing on the skills that we have to them and the understanding that it isn't about them. It's not their fault. It's not their personalities. it's what's happened to them, and how to redeem themselves again, by learning the skills. And I think, working in the area too, we need to educate ourselves much more about the impact, on an ongoing basis. Certainly it's been a lot worse during the COVID period, for sure. Understanding why that is, what contributes to that, how to minimize the vulnerability despite difficult circumstances, and what we can do, all of us, to reduce that for ourselves too.
Mm-hmm. I just want to share that as we talked about resources, the Women's Resource Center is a major resource, as well as we have amazing counselors that deal specifically with individuals struggling in abusive situations. And it's not always the actual victim. It could be a family member or friend that's helping that victim survive or helping that victim cope. So like somebody said earlier, it impacts and affects everyone around them. We're going to be running our support group. I ran it from 2019 through to 2021 up until the COVID, but we're going to be starting that up again at the end of this month. So for anyone interested, you can always contact us and we'll put you on the list. It's a quiet, a very safe space for all of us. And it's not just for victims, it's for those who may be experiencing it via a friend or family member or an employer that just wants to understand what it looks like and how they could better manage a situation when it arises. So at the Women's Resource Center, we are here to support you. I'm a trained domestic violence facilitator. So that's something that we do. That's something in my heart. And that's something that we're going to continue to do and pick it back up as of when I said we're going to do it, February 22nd is going to be our start date.
Thank you so much, Tina. And I'm going to get you all to give some leaving comments, but I do want to remind the listening audience that if you had any questions, you can put them on the, I believe it's Facebook. You can pose your questions there. If you are uncomfortable with posing your question there, you definitely can email us at axus@gov.bm. And again, that's axus@gov.bm. We're also interested in knowing, inviting your opinions and your ideas of how we can continue to help. Sue had mentioned during our discussions, not this evening, in regards to identifying certain words that people would use when they find themselves in harmful situations, or being able to identify with some sort of a code or some sort of a tag through urine bottles at the doctor's office. Is that correct? Yeah.
All the hospitals in the UK, particularly the maternity hospitals, where partners were encouraged to come in and be with their partner. Some years ago it was encouraged. And yes, we used to put a panel of little dots underneath the urine samples just to say, yes, I am having a trouble in an abusive relationship. So the staff would be compassionate and protective about that person and would follow up, considering how vulnerable they would be with a new baby. So there's an ongoing sense of care and vulnerability there, reducing the vulnerability for both mother and child by just knowing that fact. I think it's also interesting to notice that even on the East Coast of the States now, they do screen people, even for when they do breast screening for breast cancer, to say, are you in an abusive relationship? Are you experiencing abuse? Because the biggest cause of breast cancer is stress. And so there's a lot of things medically that we experience that we may not attribute to an underlying cause of abuse in a relationship, that need to be addressed. We need to be more aware so that we can, mitigate against all the risk factors possible in any way we can.
Yeah, definitely. And Center Against Abuse has been in the hospital numerous times, having lunch and learns and talking about how to screen for domestic abuse. We've been in the majority of the corporations on the island, conducting training sessions with managers, with supervisors, with HR individuals, and assisting those individuals with understanding what abuse looks like when it comes to work, because it does look different. And so we assist them in having an understanding of what that is, and not just trying to understand it, but even addressing it and how to address it well with an individual to make them feel supported, to make them feel that their information is confidential, as well as that they feel like they're cared about as an employee when they come to work as well. So thank you, Minister, again for hosting this event for Bermuda, and thank you for allowing Center Against Abuse to come here and have a voice. As you know, we are an organization that has been around for 40 years, over 40 years, and our mission is to provide services to adults who are victims of domestic abuse and sexual assaults. And we also do that in our community reactively, but then our proactive side is that we also assist with education in the community, and we do that alongside of others that may assist us as well. And so we have Bermuda's 24-hour hotline, which is 297-8278. You can find a great repository of information on our website, centeragainst.abuse.bm. We have information on there. Maybe you don't even know if you're an abuser. Maybe you don't know if you're in an abusive situation. We have a questionnaire on there which you can go through and see. We have information on there if you're a friend or a family member of someone who's in an abusive situation. You don't know how to help them. You can go on our website and find that information. If you want, you can give us a shout as well. We have some of the best counselors on island who have also been in training over the years in how to handle victims of domestic abuse. And so we assist our clients with those matters, whether you are male or female, anyone that's over the age of 18. We're here to assist, in a confidential, private setting. And our job is to maintain your safety in all aspects, as well as teach others in how to assist you in maintaining your safety.
Can I just put my final comments in, Minister? What I'm hoping the listening audience will take away from this is once you are ready to bring that batterer or offender to justice, the DPP's office is here to support you. I encourage you all, if you find yourself in any of these circumstances we've described this evening, to please seek support from either the Center Against Abuse or the Women's Resource Center, even if it's just a friend. But I would encourage you to make that report to police, and my department is here to support. We have a witness care unit. We have 2 officers who are trained in how to assist the victims of domestic violence. You will not be put on the stand without talking to a prosecutor first. You will know what to expect, and we will be there the entire time to support you. In many of the cases, your name does not have to be made public. So you don't have to fear about your privacy even once you come forward. So I would encourage everyone or anyone who thinks that they may have finally had enough and are ready to proceed to make that step and to seek the support that you deserve and you're entitled to and is available. So thank you, Minister, for having me as well on the panel. And if anybody else needs to reach out, please knows how to get a hold of me. Everybody on this panel knows how to get a hold of me. And I personally deal with a lot of these cases myself. So you don't even have to worry about an inexperienced prosecutor dealing with your matters once you decide to take that step.
I'd like to say thank you, Minister Tanay, very, very much for taking a proactive stance with this. I think we're far too reactive to situations like this. And it's a tremendous breath of fresh air to see us getting all together. And hopefully we can highlight this to the public that there is a cohesive sense of support and care available. It's really terrific. Thank you.
And I would like to say on behalf of the Women's Resource Center, Minister Tanay, we thank you as well, because this is very dear and near to many of our hearts, whether it be directly or indirectly. Many of us have been affected by domestic violence. So this is a topic that many watching can relate to. And I just want to share that whether you're a past, current, or friend, family, loved one of domestic violence and are seeking a way out or a way to manage and cope with a situation, we are here for you. Thank you.
And I want to say, yes, I want to say thank you to Minister Farbert. As our GM Minister, I appreciate that she allowed me on her today to speak my truth and to, get it out, my story out there even more. And, I, the panel that's on her, it's really good ladies and great resources. So I think that we should reach out to the ladies that are her. I've spoke to many of the women on her personally when I had to do with my case. And, there are plenty of resources in Bermuda to get the help. And I tell people all the time, tell a friend. And I tell the friend that, if they come to you one time and say, this is happening, and they need to come to you a second, third, fourth, 20 times, just listen. Be that person that's going to listen, because you never know when somebody's had enough, and we need to be there and support them when they're had enough. So thank you again, Minister, for having me on today.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Tina, to Cindy, to Lorraine, to Sue. Like I said, you make a very major point, Lindsay, when you say people coming to you 20 times. And I think in this area, it's something that will be ongoing, because we all find ourselves, every human finds themselves in relationships, and whether those relationships are healthy or unhealthy, relationships, never come with a handbook. They don't tell you exactly what to do. And sometimes it's a trial and error. You learn from different people's experiences, but it's very important that we remain on top of this topic. So that we can be there to address the needs of these persons who need to come back over and over and over again. Our hope and our aim is to have a society, a community where we are actually ending any thoughts or any behavior of violence. That is the aim, whether it be domestic, whether it be gun violence, whether it be any sort of violence that is out there. It is important to keep this information and this awareness to the forefront. And also be mindful that February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So take any opportunity that you can, if you have a teen in your house, to make them aware of this this very important awareness campaign. You can find information online. Make this a discussion that you have with your teens. We had the conversation today where we talked about making sure that we're getting to the young people, and this is definitely an area which you can start. And so again, I want to thank all of the panelists, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Dana, to help us wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Thank you, ladies, for such a fascinating and provocative panel. This topic is most definitely needed at this time. I do want to remind the public that for more information on the Center Against Abuse, it's www.centeragainstabuse.bm. Women's Resource Center is WRC at wrcbermuda.com or 295-3882. And for the Center Against Abuse, the 24-hour hotline is 278. Again, that number is 297-8278. And we want to thank everyone for participating.
Yep, Dana, I think you're freezing there. So I'll just wrap it up. Again, please send us any questions, any ideas or thoughts that you may have. And again, that email is asksus@gov.bm. Thank you for joining us this evening.